Grüßen Sie alle hier aus der
Hello,
GIZ-Repräsentanz
everyone.
in
Welcome
Berlin
from the
zu
GIZ
unserer großen
office in
Frage,
Berlin
wie
to
aus
our
Krisen
big
bewegen,
question:
welche
how do
Impulse
we
gibt
look
es für
out of
Green
crisis?
Recovery
What
und die
impulses do we
Verkehrswende. Das
have
sind
for
die
green recovery
Fragestellungen und
and
die
the
Impulse, die wir
transport
heute
transition?
angehen wollen und
Those are the
diskutieren
questions
wollen.
that we
Herzlich
impulses
willkommen
we'd like
zu
to
dieser
discuss
gemeinsamen
today. A very
Auftaktveranstaltung von
welcome to joining
Umweltbundesamt und von der
the
Gesellschaft für
conference
internationale Zusammenarbeit.
organized by
Es ist eine ganz
the
besondere
German
Veranstaltungsreihe, die, wie ich schon gesagt habe,
Environment Agency and the
Impulse setzen
GIZ.
möchte
It's
für
a very
Green
special
Recovery
series of
und die
events that is looking to
Verkehrswende.
set
Und die
impulses
Frage
for
ist
the green
eben,
recovery
welche
and the
Impulse gibt
transport
es genau
transition.
für
And the
das
question is,
Stichwort
what
Green
are the
Recovery und die
impulses
Verkehrswende? Und
for
wenn wir auf
green
die
recovery
Pandemie
and the
natürlich auch schauen, welche Einschränkungen
transition?
haben
If we
uns in
look
dieser
towards the
Konferenz auch
pandemic and the
abgebremst, haben den
limitations that
Verkehr und
have
seine
put the
Emissionen
brakes on, so
weltweit
to speak,
beeinflusst, aber
um,
eben auch Verkehr und
COVID has
Emissionen,
impacted
die dann
transport
vorübergehend
to a
abgenommen
large
haben. Also das
degree,
sind
but
Konstellationen, die wir heute
emissions
mal
only
beleuchten
decreased
wollen und
temporarily. So
eintauchen
that's
wollen.
one
Und ich
aspect we
möchte
want to look
versprechen
at
haben,
in more
dass ich
detail
mich gleich
today.
bewusst
And of
ergänzen werde,
course,
nicht nur hier
we'll
in
be
Berlin,
talking to
sondern dass wir
various
das über
partners
manche
of
Events hinweg
conversation from
diskutieren möchten.
around the world, not just here in
Die
Berlin, but
Investitionen
literally
in die
global.
Dekarbonisierung des Verkehrssektors
Investing
sind
in
weltweit nötig und lohnen sich.
decarbonisation of the
Das wird
transport
unter anderem
sector
natürlich jetzt
are
auch mit Ausblick
necessary
auf die
globally.
COP26 unser
This
Thema
is an issue
sein, die
that's
wir
very
26
important with
sehr, sehr
a
spannend
view
machen werden,
to
dass wir auch über globale
COP26,
Klimaziele natürlich diskutieren
which
werden.
of course is all about global
Konjunkturprogramme,
climate
die die
goals.
Regierung zur Erholung der Wirtschaft
Stimulus
und aber auch zur
packages that
Erholung der
governments are
Gesellschaft
putting on
von der
to aid economic
Covid-19-Pandemie
recovery, but
schnüren,
also
sind
social recovery,
Zukunftsinvestitionen
are
und
investments
Chancen
into the
für
future
Ausrichtungen des
and
21.
opportunities for
Jahrhunderts weiter.
reorientation,
Und
for
ich freue mich jetzt
reorienting our
sehr, dass wir
lives
gleich
towards
einen Gast
better
aus Glasgow
well-being and
nochmal zu uns
recovery.
schalten werden.
And I'm
Wir schauen
delighted
noch mal
that we'll
ganz
have a
kurz, ob er
guest
online
joining us
ist.
from Glasgow. Let me just
Ansonsten
check
verbinden wir
whether
uns
he
jetzt
is
gleich nochmal
online.
direkt mit ihm, denn wir
Otherwise,
werden
he
einige
is talking
Akteurinnen und Akteure aus Glasgow direkt
directly.
zu uns schalten.
Some
Das
actors will
freuen
be
wir uns
joining us
sehr drauf.
directly from Scotland, from
Mit
Glasgow.
Blick
We
auf
look forward
Deutschland
to that.
werden wir auch nochmal ganz genauer
Looking
hinschauen. In
towards
Deutschland schauen wir
Germany,
nämlich
we'll
vom
take a closer look
Konjunkturprogramm
at what's
in
happening
die
there.
ökologische
From the
Modernisierung des
stimulus
Verkehrssektors
package, a lot
in
of
hoher
money is
Höhe, fast
flowing
30%.
into
Aber
the
es gibt natürlich auch
ecological
weltweit andere
modernization
Programme,
of
die
the
ebenfalls
transport
mit
sector.
gutem Beispiel
Globally, there's
vorangehen
other
wollen und in die Zukunft
programs
gehen
that
wollen. Da blicken
also
wir unter
want
anderem
to
natürlich auch in die Länder und in die
lighthouse
Beispiele wie
projects.
Thailand,
And of course, we'll be looking
Brasilien
at
und
example
Indien,
Thailand,
von Peru und von
Brazil,
Chile. Also die
India,
Fragen, die uns heute
Peru, and
umtreiben
Chile.
werden, was sind
So the
die ähnlichen
questions we'll be discussing
Herausforderungen, was sind
today
auch
are:
ähnliche
what are
Chancen, wo kann man,
similar
ja, wo
challenges,
muss man auch
similar
gemeinsam
opportunities?
anpacken und
Where do we
arbeiten?
have to
Und was
maybe
ist vor
join
allem auch
forces?
Deutschlands
Where do we need to
Strategie
come
bei Green
together?
Recovery und
And what's
Strategie
Germany's
für Deutschland
strategy
auch,
when it
wenn wir
comes
auf den
to green
europäischen
recovery?
Kontext
Where does
schauen?
Germany stand,
Genau. Wie
especially
schaffen
also
also
within Europe?
die Vorreiterländer im Kontext von Green
But how
Recovery
do
und die Low Carbon
forerunners
Transformation auch andere
in terms of
Nationen
green
mitzunehmen
recovery,
und
low carbon
mitzureißen?
transformation
Ich
countries,
begrüße
how
ganz
do they
herzlich hier im
manage to
Studio
also
zum einen Ingrid-Gabriela Hoven,
along other
Vorstandsmitglied der
countries?
Gesellschaft für
I'd like
internationale
to welcome
Zusammenarbeit. Hallo Frau Hoven,
Ingrid-Gabriela
schön, dass
Hoven,
Sie mit dabei
who's
sind.
a member of the
Ich
executive
freue mich
board of
einfach
the
virtuell
GIZ.
auf echte Menschen und
Welcome.
nicht nur virtuelle Menschen
I'm
zu
so
treffen.
pleased to
Auch wenn
see
wir
real
virtuell
You are now
people
miteinander
muted.
on the
geschaltet sind.
stage here today. It's great
Neben
that you
mir
can
steht
be here.
Professor Dr. Dirk
And
Messner.
next
Er
to
ist
her is
Präsident
Professor
des
Dr.
Deutschen
Dirk Messner, who is
Umweltbundesamts.
president of the German Environment Agency. A very warm welcome
Schön.
to
In
you.
dieser Runde werden wir einiges zu diskutieren haben, jetzt in den
So
kommenden
there'll be
90
lots
Minuten.
of
Die
points
Besucherinnen
to
und
talk
Zuschauer aus
about in the
Europa sind
coming
ganz
90
herzlich
minutes, but of
eingeladen,
course
sich
the
hier
audience,
Ihre
dear
Fragen
audience members,
loszuwerden,
you are
Ihre
also
Anmerkungen gerne zu kommunizieren.
welcome to
Ich als
ask
Moderatorin freue
questions,
mich
to
besonders, wenn
post
ich Sie hier
comments
haben
in the
möchte
chat.
vor Ort.
I,
Ich
as a
freue mich,
moderator, am
wenn Sie Ihre
delighted if I
Fragen,
know
Ihre
who you
Kommentare,
are.
Ihre
So it
Anmerkungen
would be
gerne mit
great
Ihrem
if
Namen
you could
versehen und
maybe
gleich
also
auch
give
mit
us
Ihrer
your name
Institution
and
beginnen.
then post a question or a
Soweit,
comment,
so gut. Mein
possibly
Name ist
also your
Fatijah Neji.
institution.
Ich darf Sie durch
My
diese
name is
Veranstaltung
Kati
begrüßen
Gallus,
und als
and it's my
Geografin
great
freue
pleasure
ich
to
mich
lead
ganz
you
besonders auf
through
unsere
today's
Diskussion
event.
von
And as a
heute.
geographer, I
Und
particularly look
bin
forward
jetzt
to our debate
gerne mal so
today.
direkt. Ich habe schon gesagt, es
So
ist eine
let me
gemeinsame
ask you rather
Veranstaltung vom
directly. I've
Bundesamt
told
und
you
der
already it's a
Gesellschaft für
joint
internationale
event organized
Zusammenarbeit.
by the UBA and
Herr
the
Messner,
GIZ.
vielleicht stellen Sie das
But Mr.
Umweltbundesamt
Messner,
noch mal ganz
perhaps
kurz vor.
You are now
would you like
unmuted.
to introduce the German Environment Agency so
Wie
that
das Umweltbundesamt
those
ist und genau wissen, was
participants who
tun
don't
kann?
know too much about this agency learn a little more?
Mitarbeiterinnen und Mitarbeitern
Yes,
ausgeübt
there's
wird.
1,700 employees at the German Environment Agency. We deal with every issue really that is linked to the environment and climate. There's a few questions relating to climate and the environment that we don't deal with. So So very broad expertise, that's the first thing. And then we focus on 4 fields. We do research, that's one thing. About half of our time is dedicated on research, and that we then use for policy advice. And the most important partner in the German context is the Ministry of the Environment, but all the other ministries that also deal with environmental questions. So policy advice, that's the second pillar. Third, we also implement environmental law, legislation. We do need scientific expertise for that. And we build networks and communication structures towards the general population. So we're one of the biggest environment agency in Europe and also globally. We are amongst the 3 or 5 top-ranked or biggest organizations. And I'm particularly interested in the GIZ because we are both global players and can work together effectively. Ms. Hoven, GIZ, the German Development Corporation, how are you organized? Well, we are sort of owned by the federal government. We have existed for quite a while and have supported the development cooperation for more than 50 years. We also cover many sectors. Transport is an important one, but we also work in the field of health, in education, supporting women and so on. We are in 120 offices around the world with 24,000 people, and our aim is to improve the lives of people, essentially. We work to support the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. That's really the framework within which we work. So for the topic of the transport transition, about 400 experts work for GIZ globally. So the main fields of activity is advice and analysis, but also specific implementation, working with people locally. So capacity building is really important also at an institutional level, because that ensures that development in our partner countries, in emerging economies, can then be sustainable. Now, today is a joint event hosted by GIZ and the German Environment Agency. What are your expectations to this joint series of events? Today is the first in a series. We are marking the start of this series of events. So I'd like to ask you, what are your expectations in terms of positioning this topic prominently in the debate? Well, it's just a few days before the COP26 in Glasgow will start. So we thought, what's a topic that's really crucial, central en route towards climate neutrality? What topic is really important to slow down global warming? We all know how big the challenges are in Germany. We all know what we need to do to bring down emissions by 2030, but we also know that a lot more needs to happen globally. It's not just down to us what we can do at home, but we also need to make sure that transformation towards sustainability and zero emissions in the transport sector also takes place in the global south. 2030, we know we need to have achieved that transition, and that's not much time. 99 months is just around the corner, really. So we said to ourselves, many people don't appreciate that 70% of global emissions are caused by energy and transport. It's those two sectors. And transport, of course, is becoming increasingly important, especially in emerging economies where cities are growing rapidly. Urbanization does lead to more mobility and corresponding growth of emissions. So this joint event, we'd like to document, first of all, that we've recognized the importance of a global transport transformation, which comprises activities here in Germany, but also in the global south, because otherwise the 1.5-degree target cannot be achieved. But it's not just about mobility. We want to show today that this is connected to questions like a circular economy, price, and social justice, also social participation, which can be achieved or can be thought of quite differently in the context of sustainable transport. And we'd also like to look at potential challenges and obstacles. What's blocking the transport transition? How do we maybe need to redesign communication? And we'd like to demonstrate what experiences we have on the part of the German Environment Agency and GIZ. A lot has already happened. Some of these projects also through joint funding. And we'd like to bring these examples to the table in order to underline the complementary capacities that we have, and that it's really important to think along those lines. Thank you very much. It's the first in a series of events, so we look forward to what's to come next. Mr. Messner, green recovery, that's a big word. Can you maybe sketch out the core idea? We talk a lot about green recovery, but I think we need to be more specific. What are we talking about precisely? Well, you all know that the pandemic has brought the global economy to a halt, more or less. We've experienced this in Europe, but also globally, and the rich countries then invested in comprehensive stimulus packages to reactivate our economy. So that's the idea of recovery. Now, it's important to say that even though we have a crisis to deal with, we want to make sure that the recovery part, the rebooting of the economy, goes through green investments. So many of us try to push this idea, also many international conferences, because in 2009, during the financial crisis, we saw that when investment programs were instigated, everybody forgot about climate and green topics. So this is meant to be different, and that's why we talk about a green recovery. So today we want to see has it worked and what can it mean for transport. Okay, let's bear in mind green recovery. I'd like to welcome our first international guest. Gonzalo Munoz has joined us. Virtually, at least, we are delighted. He's COP high-level climate champion. He's a business entrepreneur and a social change maker, always at the forefront when it comes to ecological and environmental innovations in Chile. With this vision, for example, it's just one example of many. He has rebuilt the recycling system in Chile for a future without waste. He is now in Glasgow at the COP and will give us some impressions from Glasgow. We look forward to hearing from you, Gonzalo.
Well, thanks so much to the GIZ for inviting me today, and great to be with all of you. We have, I think that we all have heard very clearly how we are in a COVID situation and how around the world storms and floods and wildfires are definitely intensifying, as well as air pollution sadly is affecting the health of tens of millions of people, and unpredictable weather is causing untold damage to homes and livelihoods too. So this is an urgency that is affecting people everywhere around the world and must make us act very urgently. But also, while the impacts of climate change are devastating, there are also advances in climate that are leading to cleaner air, creating good jobs, restoring nature, and at the same time, unleashing economic growth. This is the major economic growth path and in history. We are seeing how climate is positioned nowadays in the center of the opportunities that we have for a growth narrative. So, of course, despite the opportunities, we are not acting fast enough. To avert this crisis, we need countries to join forces urgently at COP26 next week and the next 2 weeks. Right around the corner, right? The UK will host an event that many believe to be the world's last best chance to get runaway climate change under control. In the run-up to COP26, the UK is working with every nation to achieve important goals, as you know, as securing global net zero by mid-century and keep the 1.5 degree within reach. Also, adapt to protect communities and natural habitats. We are now using like the mantra coming from Emma Howard-Boyle that we need to adapt or die. Then, of course, we need to mobilize finance, both public and private. And we know we need to work together to deliver. We can only rise to the challenges on the climate crisis by working together and restore the trust and the confidence on the multilateralism. These goals at COP include, of course, decarbonizing all sectors, being the transport sector one very, very important. The transport sector emissions have actually increased in recent years, and it is now the single largest emitting economic sector in many countries. COP26, therefore, presents a chance to deepen the shift to sustainable transport. There are many reasons to get excited, which go well beyond the environmental agenda. We need the transport sector to get decarbonized, to improve our air quality, to reduce inequalities, to raise our activity levels, and thereby our public health. And as part of many strategies for transport, key things must be achieved at this COP, such as decarbonizing transport as part of every country's national climate crisis strategy. And we're seeing in the last weeks and months how many countries are coming with new plans related to not only electrifying certain fleets and the public transport, but also promoting two-wheelers and three-wheelers and different categories of mechanisms of transport being absolutely zero emissions. We need to, of course, accelerate the shift toward public and active transport. We need to decarbonize road vehicles and decarbonize how our goods and services reach us, as well as we need the solutions for emission reductions based on specific locations. COP26 is an unmissable opportunity for the transport sector. We already know from years of research that initiatives such as carpools and e-bikes get people moving more, using public transport more, and cutting the private car out of their lives. We know that walking and cycling rates can be boosted when people are offered the routes that fit their needs. And we need to understand that this is not only a crisis that is affecting, or an opportunity that is connecting the people in the global north. We need to make these solutions land in the global south. So we need to build on that momentum rather than the swing to motorized travel that we have seen during the pandemic. The creation of mobility and community hubs in our towns and cities can take us further, allowing people to get to where they want to be in a way that incorporates shared community and public transport with walking and cycling. I mean, I can speak hours about this. The important thing is the transport and zero emission transport will be in the center of the discussion, and we look forward to position those solutions as we go beyond COP26 to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias natürlich auch an Sie.
Thank you very much. And a big thank you to you from Berlin. Thank you so much to take your time before Glasgow, because we know it's going to be very hectic, yet you took the time to give us this input. We will come back to this in a second, but all the best for Glasgow. And I look forward to seeing you again. And then we can talk for hours, hopefully, about this interesting subject, because what you have said is true. The COP26 is the chance and the opportunity. Many things still remain to be discussed. Thank you very much. All the best for the COP, and thank you for joining us today. That was Gonzalo Munoz. He is COP26 high-level climate champion, and he has all kinds of different appointments, but he sort of took the time to also say a few words here. Thank you. Before we come back to what Gonzalo Munoz just said, Ms. Hoven and Mr. Messner, we would like to come back to what you said regarding green recovery. And I think that it's very important to also take an academic view on where we, that is Germany, also with regards to the transport transition stand, and where we stand in terms of green recovery, to then discuss what do we need in cooperation with others, and also Germany in the conglomerate with European partner countries. So maybe you can give us a brief analysis in terms of where does Germany stand. I brought a few slides on this topic. And first of all, I would like to show you the different sectors that we're talking when you want to protect the climate. What you can see on the left, dark blue piece of the pie is traffic. So in Germany, 20% of emissions account for traffic or are connected to transport. This is the piece of pie that is comparable to the industry. So industry is a bit bigger, but yeah, the transport sector is a very significant one. Then go to the right, please, and you will see that the transport sector worries us. From 1990 until 2020, you can see the development of emissions here, and you will see that when it comes to the energy industry, and this has to do with high emissions that are caused, and we have managed to reduce the emissions in the past 20 years, and this even applies to agriculture. And then look at the weakest sector with lowest reductions, and that's transport. So the transport sector is really the sector that worries us in Germany, and we have to discuss what can be done to make change happen and improve the situation. So this is the initial situation. The transport sector is a very crucial one. And then when talking about reforming the transport sector, reforms that become imperative in Germany, then the message is that about 50% of the problem that we have to solve to reduce emissions in all sectors to zero by 2045? Well, 50% of solving the problem is reducing the fleet, towards electrifying the fleet. And we need renewable energy sources for this, but this is 50% of the deal. Often people do not focus on the other 50%, which is restructuring the transport system as a whole. We need more public transport. We need more bikes, like Mr. Munoz just said it. In Berlin, the share of bike transport is under 20%. In Northern European countries like Stockholm, this share is at 50% and higher. If you go to these cities, you will see it. Transport is totally different organized in these countries. So expand public transport, bike transport will increase. We need a new transport system. And this is sort of the second half of what we need to achieve. At the UBA, we have come up with a very bold suggestion, has not just been praised, because we say that the number of cars per 1,000 inhabitants has to be reduced to 150 per 1,000 inhabitants. Of course, we need investments in the public sector. We don't want to limit mobility. We want to rearrange and reorganize it. And the last aspect is this one here. It is the recovery programs. We want to connect green recovery with the transport sector. And the most important statement you can see here, down here, you can see the German recovery program that was developed in cooperation with Europe. And what you can see in green here is positive with regards to environmental implications and climate protection. It is 38% of what we fund through Europe. Look above now, and you can see the European share and the German recovery program. We're talking 130 billion euros, which is 4% of the German GDP, which is actually a lot of money. So you can really push a lot with this. And if you take a look at the overall package, the upper bar, that is, then you will see that in the green areas, things look pretty good. But we also have a negative area where we were detrimental to the environment and climate with our investments. Only 20% of the overall package is green based. So if we really want to protect the climate and reduce emissions by 2045, and if we really want to achieve the SDGs, we still need to do some homework. So the new government has a lot still to do. One last remark, and that builds a bridge to cooperating and the cooperation between our two organizations. What has been very important in Europe is the following. In the situation of the COVID crisis, a 750 billion euro package was earmarked and produced. And we need this in order to support the weaker economies in Europe. If we hadn't done this, if we hadn't earmarked this money, then we wouldn't have been able to achieve the climate goals, reduction by 55% by 2030. We would have never achieved those. So without international cooperation, we cannot get out of the crisis. And Europe has done a good job in this. This 750 billion package was fundamentally crucial. Yeah, this is building a bridge to my next question. Thank you very much. You're shedding light on Germany, but you're also talking about Europe. Let us now take a more global perspective and focus on the global south. Ms. Hoven, when talking about green recovery and the transport transition, what does the situation look like in the rest of the world, especially in the global south, with GIZ's partner countries, that is? So again, transport transition and green recovery, what does the situation look like in other countries? Well, yeah, hold on a second, please. Here we go. All right, so what many people might not know, Dirk Messner just mentioned the challenges for Germany, is that OECD countries, that is industrialized countries and non-OECD countries, to similar shares contributes to CO2 emissions in the transport sector. But what you might also see here in this graph is new dynamics in the non-OECD countries, because this is where between 2010 and 2019, the CO2 emissions increased by 34%. And you can see it on the right-hand side here. In most regions, we are not on a decarbonization path. Of course, you also have to mention that we have started at totally different levels. Currently, the average of transport emissions per capita is at 0.88 tons, but in North America, we are talking 6 tons almost, and in Africa, it is almost only 0.25 tons, which shows you that there's a lot of equality when it comes to the distribution of emissions. But what is decisive? If we take a look at this graph here, what do we have to achieve? If we want to achieve 1.5 degrees centigrade, it means we cannot afford more than 0.2 tons per capita. In other words, when it comes to the growth paths in Africa and Asia, this is not sustainable. Academics told us that there is a global remaining residual CO2 budget for the transport sector, and the budget is 110 gigatons. Transport emissions in Germany per year are 164 megatons. And if you do the math, you can easily imagine how quickly such a transport budget will be used up in the future. In other words, the transport sector plays a crucial role if we really take things seriously in that respect, if we really want to achieve the 1.5 degree goal. So there's another factor that is very interesting. Look at the dynamics that you can see here in the slide. So the second point here, strongest growth in Asia and Africa. And this is, of course, due to ongoing urbanization trends and developments there. And motorization since 2000 had doubled this trend. In Asia, it has even increased by 117%. So they are catching up very quickly with regards to per capita emissions. What do we need in order to break up these trends? Dirk Messner mentioned it already regarding Germany. So we need partnerships to decarbonize the transport sectors. We need role models, we need pioneers. We just talked about Chile, and we will also have another example of Santiago de Chile later, also with regards to bike transport, increasing bikes in cities. We need to forge alliances between governments, but also local decision makers at the local level. And these are things that we have to sort of organize in the future. Allow me to move on to my next slide. Well, from a global perspective, we looked at the recovery programs that were launched for the recovery of different economies and also for the industries, and also to protect the environment from the current pandemic. And global estimates assume that about 20,000 billion US dollars were earmarked, which is a huge sum. So 20 trillion, in other words, 20 trillion US dollars. And of course, a big share of this money, as you will see here on the left, will be earmarked for short-term social expenses, boosting programs, bailout programs, short-time money in Germany, for instance, but 20% at the end of the day were stimulus packages for the economic recovery, for sort of resetting the economies. And of course, this entails the question, what were the implications on the transport sector? And calculations have shown that 500 billion US dollars were invested in the transport sector. But unfortunately, we have to say that more than half was not spent in sustainable transport measures. For instance, subsidies to airlines that are not bound by any climate protection regulations, or very traditional road construction projects that are not really environmentally friendly and sustainably. And in addition to the 270 billion US dollars of this total package of the 500 billion, yeah, they did have a certain green element, and you can call them like a first seed that was planted to achieve a transition in the transport sector. For instance, these were new buying incentives for e-cars, the expansion of public transport systems, of bus systems, and also of charger stations. So it basically confirms what Dirk Messner has just sketched for Germany. So first of all, globally, we have to say that even in the context of economic stimulus opportunities, because the significance of the transport sector is huge. And we could have achieved win-win situations if the money had been invested in the area or in the direction of decarbonization. But unfortunately, this wasn't really the case. Having said that, there's a lot that needs to be done. So if you want to make the transport sector more sustainable, you need more investments. And once the stimulus money has been spent, it's no longer there. So third aspect that I would like to briefly mention. And yeah, it is the overall distribution. We have to bear in mind, and this is basically what this slide shows you, and you can see the bars here in different colors. So 90% of the economic or stimulus funds have been accumulated in the north, and the global north were spent there. And outside of the OECD countries, there were only minor investments in the transport sector. We're talking about 70 billion spread to 28 different countries. But of course, this is not enough. This is not enough for a transformative impetus or impulse. And you can see the almost invisible bars for sub-Saharan Africa. These are the low-income countries. In other words, they didn't really have any resources or very little resources. So what needs to be done now, and this brings me to the end of my intervention, is a huge investment need. The OECD estimates the global investment need in the transport transition at $270 billion US. So this is a lot of money, and 60 to 70% would have to be placed and invested in the global south. We will come back to global funding later, Ms. Gallus, but what these numbers tell us is that a lot of investments still have to be made. It's not enough to have public investments. We have to go to the capital market. We have to mobilize the private sector. But the running investment programs that exist in this sector have to be brutally rearranged and reorganized to really achieve this and make this change happen.
Thank you so much for your inputs, and thank you very much for posting questions. I'm going to collect them, and in the second round, we'll get back to answering those. We just heard it from Gonzalo Munoz. Of course, climate financing will be an issue that's going to be discussed at the COP. I'd like to pick up on that because climate financing and also incentives for green recovery programs, those kind of go along with those two key terms. And it's something that our two guests have been dealing with for many, many years. Ms. Hoven, I'd like to ask you, what role is played by climate financing? You said it's an important issue, but what role is played by incentives for green recovery programs? Where do you set priorities? Where do you see priorities? Yes, at the moment, actually, in many developing countries or emerging economies, we are still right in the middle of the COVID pandemic and the economic crisis. So that's what we shouldn't forget. And we perceive different phenomena. Overall, economic collapse or downturn in many countries. That means that tax income was lost, and some public funding basically was much reduced. But during the COVID pandemic, in developing countries, especially also in large cities, behavior has changed with respect to public transport. People in Mexico City, for example, were afraid of catching COVID. Some people then switched to bicycles, but others switched back to their cars. So we had a situation where in many countries, public transport companies had to cope with a huge loss of income. They delayed investing in future-proof technologies. So on the one hand, we have a phenomenon where we're noticing mobility patterns are changing, which is a good thing. But then we don't have the necessary economic power, especially in emerging economies, to say, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to make sure that my finances are invested correctly also for the transport transition. So what we are doing in some countries is to lend advice to say, okay, where do you have investments that are damaging to the climate? For example, is there any subsidies for petrol in the country? And how can we maybe reduce those existing subsidies without causing economic or social hardship and without perhaps causing disadvantage to small companies? So this is one thing that we do. We give advice to municipalities and governments to first of all see what is available in terms of funding, in terms of money that can be spent, to make sure that this money is then directed so that better climate impulses can be set. And that also includes
vielerorts gibt es ja nur wenig Kapazitäten, wirklich auch
costs for trips into town, for example, in public transport. But there are other initiatives. And their development cooperation is an important factor to make sure that partners stay the course and also see that this is achievable at the end of the day. And of course, and I'm going to be honest, we also say we don't just need more investment in the transport transition. We also, and that's because we are still in the COVID crisis, we need more security for existing sustainable transport companies. And there we hope that Glasgow can send positive signals with respect to climate financing. And that also, necessities are actually perhaps then given a more prominence in the transport sector. Mr. Messner, talking about impulses, green recovery and financial instruments, do you have any expectations of Glasgow COP26? Let me comment. I think the image that Ingrid Hoven has just sketched out is really interesting, because when you look at the figures, the pandemic has shown that the dynamic and wealthy countries and poorer countries are drifting apart. And the data, I think, show this very clearly. The investment needs in emerging countries are enormous. In the countries of the global north, we have had big stimulus packages. Yes, they would have needed to be greener, but the economies are recovering. And if I look at the global map, I would say that, first of all, I thought the European Green Deal, Green Deal, has actually survived the pandemic in Europe and was accelerated now with additional funding. That in the United States, the new Biden government, we're seeing similar developments. That's also very positive. And that dynamic then has had an impact on China. China is also moving towards green investment, climate investments. But then we have this enormous gap. Many countries that don't even have enough investments in order to stabilize what they have. So some things are drifting apart here, which we shouldn't forget. I use the term a sort of climate ambition paradox. In Europe, I would say we are quite demanding in terms of our objectives. Okay, we have to implement them, at least our goals, our objectives, they are ambitious. The same goes for the United States and China to some degree. But we don't make the same efforts that Ingrid Hoven has just described. The enormous deficits of investments in countries of the global south. We don't bring the same level of ambition, and that ambition is needed in order to have equal partnerships and equal playing fields. Is that because we lack passion or staying power or what? I think it's two important components. One is internal reforms towards climate neutrality, in our case, are such an enormous challenge because we have to touch every sector. That political capital is drawn to it. The attention of decision makers of our societies is drawn to that factor. And that means we don't have enough attention left to see the rest of the world, even though we know we can only solve the problem globally. That's the one thing. The other is the investing dimension.
Wie haben sich die ODA-Zahlen während der Pandemie entwickelt?
How have figures developed during the pandemic? I think they went up, didn't they? I think they went up. ODA figures, okay, they increased slightly. In industrial countries, I said 4% of the GDP in Germany was invested in recovery. But when it comes to ODA, we have a similar kind of plateau during the COVID crisis. So what that tells us is that we are lacking in the stimuli that we would have needed, and those, of course, they need to be green. So that's exactly what we need to look at during COP. We need to convince decision makers that we don't just need to invest at home, but also when it comes to international cooperation. We need to do our homework.
Situation auch die richtige Messgröße ist, ne? Weil natürlich wurden auch
I'm wondering if, the period of COVID is the right yardstick. I mean, Germany, yes, was a forerunner, but the big development banks have made available stimulus funds and so on, or recovery funds. But if we translate that back into what's happened because of COVID to the economies locally, also, just tax income lost to municipalities, for example, then of course you have to ask how much scope is there for transition and transformation. We saw this in our partner countries where schooling programs, education programs were stopped, where lots of things were stopped. And COVID, immediate, support funding programs have managed to avert the worst, but studies tell us that the big transformation towards climate neutrality requires huge upfront financing. We really need to change the system. We need to take a systemic perspective. It's no good taking small steps, incremental steps. And for that, we don't have the necessary strength at the moment. Yes, it's to do with political attention, but also in the partner countries. We are getting phone calls from the ministries of finance telling us, well, we need to make sure that our budgets can somehow be balanced. We can't think about investments for the time being. So the question is, for the 99 months that we have left that I referred to, do we need to actually be really honest and ask ourselves, what do we really need in terms of public funding, public money, in order to take those first steps that we need in order to achieve the big transformation, energy transformation, transport transformation? And in the debates I lead, also with civil society, I'm noticing that there's a lot of talk about resilience, adapting to climate change. Of course, very important topics. I'm completely in favor of that, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that if we don't invest in the global south, especially the forerunner countries, Mexico, Chile, South Africa, that are really moving towards that stony path of transformation in the field of energy and transport, they now need us. They need us to flank their efforts with international partnerships and alliances so that they can actually achieve this, and that they can work on elements of that transformation process successfully. And that needs more energy, more willingness. And the question is, what needs to happen in the global south in addition to what we need to do in the global north? And that seems to be lost a little in the political debate. That's my view, especially, even with the really committed energy activists. Because yes, it's about what we need to do, but 1.5, we can only achieve this if it happens everywhere, transformation in every country. Doesn't make things easier, and especially as GIZ, well, we keep saying, please don't forget partner countries, please support them. They need us so that they don't give up and that they get the feeling, as promised in the climate negotiations internationally, that this that it's not going to be a zero-sum game, but that there's going to be a win-win at the end of the day, as Gonzalo Munoz said, climate justice, climate neutrality, but also jobs and growth and better lives for people locally. And for that, we need a lot more global commitment of industrial countries. Do we have time for me to add one idea? Yes, maybe just one sentence before we read out some questions from the audience. Yes? I just wanted to make this clear. The example of Europe. Last April, when the pandemic started, we had around with the directors of all the European Environment Agency. That's more than 30, not just in the countries of the EU. And we discussed in our countries, where do we see opportunities to organize green recovery in our countries, and where is the green discourse breaking down? And it was a very simple picture. The wealthy country of Europe said, we are going to do green recovery, because climate neutrality is what it's all about. We are going to support the European Green Deal. And the weaker countries in the EU, they said, well, actually, we don't have any legitimization. Just like the ministers of finance from African countries, they're, the immediate questions are more important than long-term climate goals. So 57 million euros were then taken up. So international cooperation in Europe actually worked to support the weaker countries, and that we need to learn from for the global situation.
So Andrea Meza is already waiting. I will be with you in a second. Please stay on the line. And yeah, she's the environmental minister from Costa Rica. But before she gets the floor, Florian Güldner has a question for you, Mr. Messner, because he's picking up the point that you have just mentioned, green recovery. Here's the question. Could you mainly share the results of the Green Recovery Tracker of the Wuppertal Institute, according to which Germany earmarks only 20% for green measurements and things? Yeah, the data that I have just presented has basically shown this. If we take a look at the entire recovery program of the German government, it is 130 billion euros, and 21% focus on green and climate neutral measures. And part of these funds, 15 or 20%, were assessed as counterproductive by the Wuppertal Institute, definitely not climate neutrality effective. So the picture is correct. And a slightly different perspective on the discussion is the following. At the UBA, and last year, we conducted a study and we looked at 130 global reports that were published on all different continents on recovery programs. Because my concern was, and it was like during the financial crisis, the climate issue, the sustainability issue sort of disappear from the debate. But this is not reflected in the studies. So the guideline has sort of changed, but investments have not followed track. So there is a decoupling of a shift of perspectives and real investments. Thank you very much. So let us sort of stop the debate for a second, because now I would like to welcome our international guest, because we have bienvenidos Andrea Meza with us. Welcome. Great to have you here. She's the Minister of the Environment in Costa Rica. I would say good morning. I don't know if you are in Glasgow already or still in Costa Rica, but anyways, it's wonderful to have you here. And you also would like to tell us from your perspective what the implication of the pandemic has been on e-mobility and other transport issues in your countries. We are eager to hear what has happened in your country in the area of e-mobility.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you to the government of Germany and to GIZ, partners in this transformation that we are trying to achieve in terms of decarbonizing our transport sector. And yes, I was hearing a little bit this conversation about the impacts of the COVID pandemic and the challenges that we are facing for a green recovery. And I would like to share with you some of the information that we're having. As you know, we launched our decarbonization plan. Transport sector is really a critical part in our case to do the decarbonization of our economy. And of course, what we are seeing and what we are trying is to really generate a good enabling condition for this transformation to happen. We, thanks to the support of GIZ, we have been implementing a pilot project that it is generating very good data. And we started the implementation of the pilot project, and then the pandemic happened. And this really had a big impact in the public, in the bus transport sector. And let me just share some of the elements that they shared with us, the different operators. That they mentioned that, for example, in May 2020, 80% of the bus riderships dropped. And in September 2020, revenues of bus companies dropped by 82%. So we were doing the pilot project, then the pandemic happened, and then we were like in the middle of this situation, trying to convince the bus operators that we really need to implement and do the scaling up of this pilot project. And of course, we are in this complex moment But the good thing from the pilot is that we have been demonstrating that it is a very cost-effective technology, that it is more cost-effective than diesel if we have the right operating and financial conditions to do that. And one thing that we are facing right now, and we are in the negotiation of the new concessions, is the period of the concession. In our case, it's a 7-year period. And from the information that we have, this is something that we need to change because this period of 7 years does not allow the recovery of this initial investment. So basically, what we are working right now is to trying to increase this. If there are some bus operators committed for this, then we can give concessions for 15 years. And this is something that we are working on. But this is just to share that, yes, it is critical to continue mobilizing resources, to continue generating a special financial mechanisms, and that it has been so important and powerful to have the pilot because now we have concrete data and we are destroying some myths around the use of this e-mobility in the whole transition that we are doing. I can be sharing more things, but I think my time is over. So over to you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Ministerin. Vielen Dank für Ihre
Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much for this interesting input. Ms. Hoven, did you want to ask a question for Ms. Meza? You were just looking at me. Are you agreeing, especially when it comes to the funding instruments? Well, first of all, I would like to thank Andrea for participating in this event. Muchas gracias. I look forward to seeing you again in Glasgow. Andrea, you mentioned the problem of the corona pandemic, but Andrea, your decarbonization project is a role model. It is very ambitious. How did you manage to get the bus operators and the population on board? And why didn't they say, oh, this is way too risky, we don't want to join this project, and we're not following the ideas of the government? How did you manage?
Well, first, we are generating good economic information, demonstrating that this is good for their business case. And basically, this is so important. And in the case of the users, it is incredible when we see the faces and yes, the reaction of the people who are using these these electro units, these buses, because you know, they don't, it's really a good technology, more comfortable. When we also have this conversation with with the different stakeholders that are there, they are seeing the benefits of the technology. But of course, the conversation right now, it's about generating the specific financial conditions, and we're working with the different banks to see if we can develop a specific financial products. And then what I was mentioning, this condition of the contract. So in our case, it's really to demonstrate that this is not an environmental issue, that this is more about transforming our cities, generating welfare for the citizens, and also making the economic case. At the end, every investment in the transport sector and enhancing the transport sector is really a very democratic measure. And because a lot of people is using transport, and if we can offer a robust and a good public transport system, and the electrification is really helping us to generate a better service, then everything contributes for this argument.
Vielen Dank, Frau Ministerin, und natürlich auch für Ihre Nachfrage, Frau Hoven. Sehr, sehr spannende Einblicke in das, was Sie momentan natürlich.
Thank you very much for the question, Ms. Hoven. Very interesting inputs. And from Costa Rica, we go to India, to Sudendhu Sinha. He is Senior Advisor, Niti Aayog, in India. And of course, we are eager to hear what you think. When following him on Twitter, on the day of electromobility, on the 9th of September, he tweeted, "The Indian government is launching breathtaking initiatives to foster and promote e-mobility in India." So what has a country like India done and achieved in the area of e-mobility to manage the pandemic? Great to have you here, Mr. Sinha. We are looking forward to your words and statements.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Great connecting to you. During pandemic was absolutely brutal in India, but during this pandemic times, lot of thinking through, we spent time in recalibrating our existing policies, as well as working through how the new policies could be positioned the moment we are in a kind of relieved situation. And exactly in the month of June, when the situation was slightly kind of manageable for us, a good number of initiatives were immediately positioned. So we had the production-linked incentive scheme for advanced chemistry cell and battery storage. That is almost $2.5 billion program to incentivize manufacturing. So in India, in 2024, you will be watching the first Make in India, Made in India kind of advanced chemistry cell rollout. Similarly, we re-strategized the FAME2 initiative, the first adoption and manufacturing of electric mobility. Finally, the Shuni campaign, that is the converting the end-mile vehicles into end-mile delivery vehicles into kind of electric, completely green. That initiative was taken. There was another production-linked incentive scheme launched for automobile components. So we had strategized, we had incentivized FAME. Through FAME, we had incentivized the vehicle unit, and then with the PLI scheme, we supported the battery, and we also supported the automobile components. The states, which are a kind of constituent units of the sovereign India, so most of the states, majority of them are having their own state EV policies, and it is very, very aspirational, very, very competitive, because they know that it is going to bring to them a lot of prosperity, lot of transformational changes. And yes, good number of our technical institutes are now having departments, dedicated departments for electric mobility, battery storage, sustainable engineering, those kind of things. As a whole, I would say that the country stands by the greatest disruption of our times, that is electric mobility, and as such, we are trying to go through it. The result of all these interventions, all these initiatives has been really, really very, very, I would say that it is very positive for the entire country, because we can see that in the new sales of vehicles, especially in the segment of two-wheelers, there is a wonderful kind of achievement. So there was a time when vehicles were waiting for the kind of users, they were waiting for the consumers. Now today it is the other way around. The demand is more and the vehicle units are less. As a result, either OEMs are ramping up their capacity immediately, or new OEMs are getting into a kind of in the business so that they are able to serve it. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Sinha, für diese ersten Ausführungen. Sie bleiben ja bei uns in der Leitung, denn
Thank you very much. You will stay in the line. We will talk about price policy instruments with you in a second, so please stay online. So I would now like to digest what we have just heard from Costa Rica and India. Mr. Messner, the question is, what can Germany learn from India and Costa Rica? Because we're talking about a dialogue here. Just a few thoughts on what I have just heard. Costa Rica, one of my favorite countries in Latin America, by the way. I worked a lot in Latin America. Costa Rica started to embark upon the path of sustainability from very early on. One of the few countries with a real nature protection concept, and we have all learned from this. And also what we have just heard from the minister is that they have a vision. They have a clear vision of the future, of an attractive future. She says it's not just about the environment, it's about social developments in cities. It's about human-centered developments, and it has to be connected to the economy. And we also heard this from India. You have to turn this into a business case. So you have different elements that come together, and we as Germans are not pioneers, but latecomers. I mean, in certain areas, we have been pioneers in the area of renewable energies. For instance, we were pioneers, and now we have to upscale and expand everything. When it comes to transport, we are definitely not pioneers because we are masters of the combustion engine. John Maynard Keynes once said, it's very easy to develop new concepts and ideas. It's difficult to forget the old ones. And we had our old combustion engine concepts. We didn't want to give them up, and we were hoping that they could be optimized and improved, made more energy efficient. But the track, and we have just heard this from India and Costa Rica, the train goes towards electrification, and Germany will also go in that direction. The automotive companies have changed in the past 18 months. I mean, everything is very fresh still, this shifting of and in the automotive industry in Germany. And if we can achieve this, it will be good. It will be good for jobs and economic development. And both colleagues from Costa Rica and India told us that this has a lot to do with health and quality of life. Less noise, better air, fewer cars, more public transport. So this is a nice guideline.
We'll stick with e-mobility. We want to talk about opportunities, but also risks. What do you think are potential risks when we look at economic development and the transport transition? Well, if we say we want to move towards e-mobility is the new future, we need to get rid of combustion engines, you have to put this into a larger context. For us, there's three issues. The first one is to try and avoid more transport. Through smart urban and regional planning, also digitalization might offer new opportunities. Second is to switch all the remaining transport to environmentally friendly transport. And third is to improve the efficiency of transport. So if we then see how far can we get through switching to e-mobility, where can we create benefits, then we see that it has to be combined with expanding renewable energies in the respective countries. That is also a challenge. And of course, there's other fields where we'd say e-mobility is not a silver bullet. We have to see that other issues related to transport and urbanization problems have to be considered as well. One thing I'd like to underline, and many cities saw this during the COVID crisis, is the positive elements for quality of life in cities, better air, health phenomena, and so on. So I think it's really remarkable. We had Chile as an example, when now it's clear that people don't want to go back to traditional transport concepts. There's more reliance on bicycles, there's more reliance on public transport, and making sure that public transport switches to e-mobility. But if this is to make sense, then we need to also ask, how do we get the raw materials that we need for this in an environmentally friendly way? And the third aspect that's also important, the countries that are embarking on this path, they have certain expectations when it comes to job impacts. They want to produce the respective components that are needed for e-mobility because it is linked to job creation, for example. So overall, the studies are showing this already, and that's what's convincing many emerging countries. If we know now that expanding cycling networks leads to more jobs than just building roads, because it is more labor intensive, then that has a positive knock-on effects on employment. And many emerging economies need exactly that after the COVID crisis, a positive impact on employment. What we heard from Costa Rica, what we can do in international cooperation as GIZ, well, we can support countries in planning for the long term, that they collect the right data, so they know, is there a business case to be made for a switch? But also in the administration, and Costa Rica, of course, is well advanced in that respect, we can make sure that expertise is being generated globally. So as far as we can tell, 250,000 experts are lacking globally, people who know how to do a transport transition, moving the sector towards e-mobility. So people who can analyze things, people who can have the right instruments. So that might be an added risk if we don't also develop these capacities in a very decisive way and fast, then maybe that transition towards e-mobility will also fail. Plus the other factors, environmentally friendly aspects, embedding that in more holistic concepts. So we need the expertise to be able to do this. Okay, thank you. I'd like to come back to your questions from the audience. Thank you very much to the audience for asking questions. Let's take a few minutes. Okay. Raw materials, something that's been discussed in the chat. Let me pass this back to you, Ms. Hoven, because without raw materials, we do not have any chance of implementing an energy transition or a mobility transition. What does that mean for emerging countries if there's an increase in the demand for batteries, for example, by 500%, which will make everything more expensive? Well, first of all, we could say that it leads to business. It's a good that is being traded, but of course we know that resources can also become a curse. So we work very closely with German companies, make sure that the raw materials that are needed for batteries, for example, that we develop processes where raw materials are extracted under the appropriate social conditions, that these raw materials are also certified so that we know their provenance, which is not yet the case, and that then needs to be embedded in questions of good governance and public participation. Yes, it's a challenge. I saw the figures from a Bertelsmann report recently on the amount of raw materials needed for the transport transition in the near future. And of course, there's always a danger that you end up with this gold rush mentality. So we can only hope that international partnerships and agreements, instruments that bring together all the various actors in the market, that they actually all stick to certain rules with respect to transparency. So that also affects some large players from the global south. And here at home in Europe, we should make sure that we maybe initiate value chain legislation, that we actually set out how we would like our value chains to be designed, which would then be an incentive for producing countries to improve their act. So sometimes we have a local advice going on locally in cobalt mines, for example, but that's hard work. We also work with German automotive companies. They want to diversify, but at the moment, they have also withdrawn from producing countries that do not uphold human rights, for example. But we see if e-mobility is to increase, then they might need suppliers from those countries. So they have a strong interest that, based on our experience, when it comes to advice, when it comes to supply chains, we do this in textile sector, in the agricultural sector, and so on, that we actually provide our expertise in order to enable the transport transition. So lithium, for example, there are certain cooperation agreements already, but a lot more needs to be done. So we just have some early pilot schemes. That, of course, isn't enough, we say, in order to meet the foreseeable demand. May I add two thoughts to what's just been said? Yes, climate and raw materials. That's a huge building site. Two thoughts. We did some studies at UBA and looked at if we prolong the climate strategies that we have set up, what would their implications be for the future? And we see that, especially in the field of e-mobility, resource needs all around the globe are going to shoot up. And that's not something we want, because we want to strengthen, we want to protect ecosystem. We don't want to exploit them even more. And the second thing is over 40% of greenhouse gas emissions are to do with the extraction and further production of resources or use of those resources. So that means we need to think circular economy and climate mitigation all at once. And that's not what we are doing nowhere in the world. So that needs to become top of the agenda. We need to have a different look at climate change. We need to look at the side effects that are important, and the circular economy is crucial in that. So let's now imagine that we are successful with a circular economy. We are using less resources. We have whole continents that whose economy is based on exporting resources. Ingrid, you might recall a year ago, we had Fatima Denton here from the United Nations University in Africa. She was in Berlin because she was very worried, because the European Union had just brought out the European Green Deal and wants to reduce the resource imports from Africa, because we, then have a circular economy. So she was wondering, what does that mean for Africa? She was calling for more cooperation and more discussion. So that's an aspect we need to consider. It's not just about, climate change and circularity, but we need to adapt to a new method in a way that we also don't forget the global south in order to organize good futures for all parts of the globe. Okay, Georg Schäfer from the audience is asking, can the objectives of the transport transformation even be achieved given that the economy is growing? Because that leads to more transport, but the growth of transport means that systemic advantages by switching to public transport, for example, would neutralize the gains that might be made. Two things. We at UBA are working very hard to implementing the climate goals in the transport sector. I told you 20% of all emissions comes from the transport sector. We want to make sure that we achieve our climate goals for 2030 in the transport sector. And we need to really work very hard to achieve that goal. We need to do everything we possibly can. And the next Minister of Transport has no easy job. But it'll only be possible if we mobilize everything that we can possibly mobilize towards a greener transport system. But for many other countries, if I look towards our Indian colleague, where the economy is growing very dynamically along a very different track to Europe, now there is an opportunity, and you said that, now there is an opportunity for leapfrogging in the new cities that are being built, and we can expect a doubling of the urban population up to the middle of the century, and that will go hand in hand with growth of mobility. We should, of course, rely on appropriate transport systems that actually rethink how public transport, car-based transport, etc., relate to one another. The model that we have had in Europe and in the United States for the last 40 years, we cannot globalize it. So there's an opportunity now to invest right away in a new system, in the urban centers that are growing. Okay, now we'll talk about pricing instruments, because we are on a journey, if you want, from e-mobility, now switching to pricing instruments. And we still have Sudendhu Sinha with us. Thank you for staying with us, Senior Advisor in India. So the question to you, what is India doing when it comes to pricing instruments? What works?
Yes, as far as the gasoline and the diesel prices are concerned, the reason for their rise is, there are many reasons are there, but that cannot be purely attributed to a kind of government initiative to transform from ICE-based to electric mobility. But yes, the most positive spin-off is that this is nudging the people from in shifting from their traditional internal combustion engine based preferences to now the electric mobility based change. So that is definitely, that is what is coming in position. Now, in addition to that, you see, as I mentioned, that incentives, because the primary reason, one of the deterring factor is, rather two of them is, that the upfront cost of electric vehicles are more in India as compared to their ICE counterpart. That is number one. And number two is that, yes, the cost to finance when they go in for the loan from the banks and other non-banking financial institutions, that is substantially high. So these two are the two deterring factors that we have been able to identify, and we are addressing them in a very, very positive way. As far as the incentives are concerned, as I mentioned in the initial intervention, that we have got the FAME subsidy, faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicles. So we have raised the kind of incentives by almost 1.5 times. That is first thing. In addition to that, state governments, they have also added on subsidy to over and above what our own central government has given them, just to bridge the gap of initial upfront cost, upfront price between the ICE vehicles and the electric vehicles. And let me tell you with a lot of satisfaction that in many of the states, especially with regard to the two-wheelers, that we are watching that in a couple of states, it has become cheaper. So now people, you don't have to convince them all the way on the total cost of parity. You simply say that the upfront cost is less, so please go in for that. So that is one of the primary pull factors for them to from ICE to electric. And this one can see, because in the month of May, while we were just 3.5% of our target, and our target was close to 1 million of the sale for two-wheelers, today we are close to 12% of our target. So you can see that in a time span of almost 4 months, we have kind of jumped 4 times from 3.5 to 12%. That is the jump. And I'm sure that by the end of this year only, our position will be from 12% will be moving on to close to 20%. So what I'm trying to tell you is that these are the incentives, these are the initiatives, these are the action points by the government that is bringing in a lot of change. And now gradually, our country is moving to that point of inflection from where the adoption to electric mobility becomes a natural kind of preference, and one does not have to kind of rely or does not have to bank on the government support or the kind of government initiatives, those subsidies. So that is there. That position is gradually we are coming. So that is why I explained to you that our initiatives, the rise in price of petrol and diesel and the gasoline based, that is nudging people to move from traditional to electric mobility. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Mit Blick auf die Uhr.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your brief inputs. And again, thank you very much for joining us. We are saying hello to India. It's actually already evening there. And see you again next time. So from India, we go to Tunisia, because who is virtually present now is Fatijah Neji. She's the Director of Strategy and Projects at the Ministry of Transport of Tunisia, and she also sketches the pricing policy instruments of Tunisia.
Bonjour à tous, ravi d'être parmi vous pour participer à ce débat autour donc, de la relance verte et le rôle des instruments de prix pour une transition vers une mobilité durable. En Tunisie, comme partout dans le monde, la pandémie Covid-19 a eu des impacts et des conséquences sans précédent sur les transports comme sur tout le secteur économique d'ailleurs. Mais il s'agit d'une opportunité au nord pour changer de comportement et migrer vers un système de mobilité durable et résilient. Dans ce sens, la Tunisie se penchait sur un plan de relance verte basé sur une stratégie nationale bas carbone à l'horizon 2050 et s'y fixait aussi des objectifs très ambitieux à l'occasion de la révision de son indice qu'elle a soumise à l'occasion donc de la COP 26. Le secteur des transports s'est forcément impliqué dans la stratégie nationale bas carbone, étant donné que c'est le secteur le premier consommateur d'énergie et c'est le second en termes des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Pour ceci, la Tunisie œuvre à la décarbonisation de son secteur des transports. Cette décarbonisation nécessite des aspects techniques liés notamment à l'électrification de la mobilité, à la mobilité douce, mais aussi nécessite aussi donc des aspects institutionnels et des réformes fortes. Pour ceci, donc le ministère du Transport a élaboré une politique nationale de mobilité urbaine durable qui a été validée par le Conseil des ministres en mai 2020. Cette politique se base sur plusieurs axes et réformes très importants, dont notamment la réforme sur laquelle je veux parler aujourd'hui, c'est la mise en place d'un système de financement périn pour la mobilité urbaine, à travers la création d'un fonds national de mobilité urbaine. Mais la question primordiale étant, quelles sont les ressources de ce fonds ? Il s'agit en fait de dénicher des opportunités de mobilisation des ressources sans pour autant alourdir le fardeau sur le budget de l'État, ni sur les opérateurs économiques, ni sur les utilisateurs. Donc, plus que la mise en place de nouveaux prélèvements fiscaux, il a été préférable d'optimiser les dépenses publiques et de modifier les canaux de financement. Pour ceci, plusieurs pistes ont été étudiées et on a retenu donc d'utiliser une partie des ressources fiscales existantes prélevées au niveau national sur le système de transport, telles que la taxe unique de compensation des transports routiers, la taxe de circulation, le droit à la consommation des véhicules et le droit et la taxe de première immatriculation. Ceci va être combiné avec la dotation budgétaire du budget de l'État. Maintenant, la question, c'est comment mobiliser des ressources budgétaires complémentaires. La mise en œuvre de la politique nationale de mobilité urbaine durable doit permettre en premier lieu l'usage des ressources de l'État. Dans la stratégie adoptée, 3 postes actuels de dépenses représentent des gisements d'économie ont été donc identifiés. C'est les subventions au carburant. L'État est contraint de réduire les déficits budgétaires publics. Elle va donc réduire, voire annuler les subventions des produits pétroliers. Donc, une partie du gain de la réduction de cette subvention s'orientera vers le Fonds national de mobilité urbaine. 2. Les dépenses d'infrastructures routières au milieu urbain. La politique multimodale efficace permettra de réduire les investissements dans le réseau de voirie d'une manière notable. Il est donc important de considérer ces économies pour alimenter le Fonds national de mobilité urbaine. Et la troisième chose, c'est les compensations tarifaires dans le transport public. Les entreprises de transport public bénéficient actuellement des compensations tarifaires qui représentent un montant de plus en plus important. Et à travers des plans de rationalisation de transport collectif qui comprendraient éventuellement une augmentation des tarifs, ces sommes pourraient être réduites rapidement et donc le gain va être orienté en partie vers le Fonds national de mobilité urbaine. Maintenant, quel rôle donc la pandémie a impacté la mise en œuvre et la mise en place de ce Fonds national de mobilité urbaine, parce que la pandémie a bouleversé tous nos planifications et tous nos calendriers. On a donc maintenant choisi pour aller sur 3 phases, l'implantation de ce Fonds national de mobilité urbaine. La phase 1, c'est la phase d'amorçage, c'est la mise en place, la création du fonds par la loi des finances. Puis la phase 2, ce qui s'étale sur 2 ans, c'est la définition des stratégies métropolitaines pour la mobilité urbaine et la rationalisation du transport collectif. Et enfin, la 3e phase, qui s'étale jusqu'à 2030, qui sera pour le financement des investissements dans le transport collectif et la multiplication des projets innovants. Voilà.
Vielen Dank und merci bien. Liebe Grüße nach Tunesien. Und damit komme ich wieder zurück hier auf das
Thank you very much and hello to Tunisia. And this brings me back to the panel here. When talking about pricing policy instruments, we also have to talk about acceptance. We have to ask ourselves, how can we achieve this? So Dirk Messner, when it comes to the acceptance of price policy instruments, how can we achieve that? And Ms. Hoven, what about social dimensions and social justice issues? Mr. Messner, you might want to go first. 2 aspects. The justice aspect as a whole. If people have the impression that things are unfair in this transformation, we will never achieve anything. We have to come up with fairness-based solutions. When it comes to the transport sector, it's very important that we turn the transport debate upside down, because often there is the concern that if we go into the new forms of mobility, that everything becomes very expensive. So those who are low income and don't have too much money cannot join in. Now, if you turn everything upside down, we at the UBA would first of all prove with our studies that wealthier parts of the population in the transport sector emit more CO2 emissions than poorer people. I mean, this is clear. They have bigger cars, they have bigger houses, they go on long distance trips. But those who suffer from the cost of CO2 emissions is those who are poorer. So they live close to noisy roads where the air is polluted. It is exactly people who emit little. So it doesn't match. So the transport system entails injustice. We at the UBA developed a transport transition for all study, and we looked at the injustices, and we then tried to figure out what could be potential answers that also offset this imbalance. So we have to bring these things together. My first thought. Second thought, we need price incentives. We have just heard it, CO2 incentives, if we want to manage this transition. We have seen very good concepts, and there's also a broad consensus in Germany and Europe and globally, because a lion's share of what we can, or what we need through the pricing policy instruments, have to be given back to the citizens, because the government shouldn't become richer. No, they should just make sure that there's a transition, and then the money can be given back to citizens. Ms. Hoven, there is also the risk of social imbalances. So what needs to be done to avoid this? Well, we have seen very good examples also in the developing countries, that is in the global south, where they have used pricing policy instruments. They mobilize resources, and this can be used for the transport transition, for the energy transition, and other things. And also the reduction of subsidies. And then the question, of course, is what kind of social imbalance can occur? And in many countries, we have seen that it is the middle class that, because of COVID, is under a lot of pressure, is at stake. But the question is, what can be done to really achieve the needy people by or that could be affected by price increases in the public transport sector? So in other areas, we have seen similar change processes. What has been pretty positive is the social security system approach, so that we say the poor population needs additional support, be it in the area of healthcare or education. It doesn't have to necessarily happen in the transport sector, but you can use other elements of the national budgets in order to help these people and to make sure that they are in a better position. What we have observed is that these transformation processes are often difficult, because the different population levels and classes in a developing country are differently affected by CO2 pricing, and they also have different influence on the decision makers. And this is something that you also need to bear in mind. And of course, this is what makes these change processes very difficult. And what is needed then is that we need multi-stakeholder dialogues. We need the civil society and the private sector. And the decision makers need to get supported to make sure that these CO2 prices and pricing schemes that are eventually positive, also when it comes to mobilizing resources, so that they are designed in a way sequentially, supported by communication, that they can really achieve the desired result. One point that is often neglected is the following. This is kind of part of the justice aspect. In developing countries, we have seen that you have to enable, we have to qualify people much more. So if we ask ourselves, how do societies have to further develop to master the big global transformation challenges towards decarbonization? Well, in contrast to us, we there need more qualification. We need more investment in education and employment, so that people have the feeling that they really participate in economic recovery and economic booms, also because of the energy and transport transitions. And they can make ends meet and they can get employment. And what we also see, and this has to do with governance factors, and taxes are also often critically viewed in developing countries. So if CO2 is priced, for instance, so market interventions is what it comes down to. And there's no transparency of state decisions, of governmental decisions. I mean, what implications are there on certain classes of the population? So where does the government money go? Money that was earmarked for education and health care goes somewhere else. So we often are confronted with a situation where citizens do not necessarily trust the decisions that are made by authorities. And of course, there is a lot that still needs to be done. communication has to be improved, transparency has to be produced, forums of exchange have to be established. And these elements of the new transformation communication, this is how I would call it, we try to introduce when we advise developing countries on their nationally determined contributions and to become more ambitious. So we include these elements from the very outset. Transport sector, CO2 pricing, and other things have to be included from the very outset. Also the reduction of subsidies. But in Peru, but also in Mexico, we have experienced that this needs to be accompanied by new formats of societal exchange and counseling. And we have to include the private industry because often it is about consensus building. And this is an element that needs to be promoted and is occasionally much stronger than here because constituting formats that we know are not known there yet. So it comes under the heading just transition. How can I create a socially fair balance? So these are the elements that we would definitely include into these advice programs to make sure that they happen.
Okay, that's a very good point. Talking of Berlin, looking at the current coalition negotiations, Mr. Messner, what's the homework for the next Ministry of Transport? What homework do we need to do so that we in Germany achieve a good transport transition? Well, I said at the beginning that there's two important points. First is that we need to make sure that we electrify the transport sector. Up to 2030, we need 15 million of e-vehicles on German roads. That's quite a lot. So you need a charging infrastructure. We don't yet have that. So and we need to, move away from the combustion engine. So between 2030 and 2035, this needs to happen because otherwise by 2040, we won't be climate neutral because cars all have a lifespan of 10, 15 years. So that's one aspect. The vehicles need to become electric, charging infrastructure needs to be there, leave behind the combustion engine. And the second field that we've discussed as well is that we need to restructure our transport systems. We need to invest in public transport, also long distance public transport. We need to improve infrastructure for bicycles, for e-bicycles. Go to Utrecht, for example. That's a dream where you see that as a cyclist, you have your own bicycling infrastructure where you don't have to worry about getting run over. And that's quite different to Berlin. So those are the big topics for the future. Gosh, I think it's a long list, isn't it? We need to keep an eye on the clock. But I want to talk about what gives us hope. We are talking about lots of challenges and long to-do lists. What gives you the hope that we can actually achieve the transport transition, especially with a view to COP26, where you'll both be attending, where you'll also be struggling, making sure that this is pushed to the front of the agenda. Ms. Hoven. Well, the first point, if I look towards Glasgow, there are some, I think, really strong initiatives that are being presented there. So we need international partnerships. The GIZ-led Transformative Mobility Initiative, TUMI, is the acronym. That's one. It works globally with 500 municipalities. 100,000 e-buses are to be in cities in the next few years. It has mobilized 3 billion euros so far. So we need more initiatives like that. And I'm sure that we'll see more of them in Glasgow, and hopefully these partnerships will be strengthened because we need them. International partnerships that are transformative, that consider the big picture, that are really ambitious. The second aspect that makes me confident in a way, or gives me courage, we heard this from our international participants, is that we have so many good role models. We had Costa Rica today, but we could also tell the story of Mexico. And those are the examples that give us hope, and give hope to other developing countries that this can work, especially because these are economic success stories that, it works, it's cheaper, it's more efficient, it makes it more competitive and so on. So if we now manage to implement this as part of concrete plans, and that's often missing, we have the overall targets and the aims, but do we actually implement them? Especially in Europe, where we have all these environment agencies Developing countries don't have these. So development countries do not necessarily have the necessary analytical capacity. There's not enough data, not the knowledge to really do the math in order to have arguments ready. So if through COP26 we managed to push the transport sector to the top of the priority list, secondly, then turn ambitious climate goals into action plans with price tags, so know what the investment needs are, then I think we can take an important step, because regionalization is really, really important for developing countries. And third, the best partners that we could possibly have, our allies, our friends who are shoulder to shoulder with us, because they feel that the transport transition is good for not just the environment, but ourselves. That's the representatives of municipalities and cities. They have become a climate lobby that we couldn't have imagined just a few years ago. And they are really moving things. They are encouraging people, and they are going to be bringing the examples to Glasgow to showcase what can be done. It's not always easy, but sometimes it's little things. For example, a temporary bicycle lane, which then becomes permanent, like in Santiago de Chile, because it proved useful. And then municipalities want that too. They want to replicate that. So it's that snowball effect that I can see, in particular when we work bottom up, from the municipalities. If we can enable these actors even more to play that role of pioneers, that gives me hope. Because what counts now is exactly that. We talked a lot about targets and goals, but if we don't implement what we have already agreed anytime soon, then the 99 months that we still have for the transport sector have disappeared in a flash, and then we have missed the point where we could have had a transition. Mr. Messner, over to you. What gives you hope? What gives you hope that the transformation really translates into action? Yes, three aspects. The first aspect is that there is technological progress, especially in the transport sector. Solutions are now possible that couldn't have been thought of 10 years ago. Think of the electrification options, what's been referred to numerous times, e-bike mobility. It's a small global revolution that's happening there. So technology is one aspect. If I look to Germany, but also Tunisia, Costa Rica, and India, listening to those inputs, winds of change as far as social actors are concerned. Germany now has a government which hopefully will be as pushy as possible. We have young people on the streets who are also complaining and pushing, and I hope they will continue to do that. They are impatient, which is good. And then we have companies that are seeing business models there. So from a German perspective, it's actually quite remarkable. Over the last 2 to 3 weeks, you might have heard, the deputy boss of the German Agricultural Association, he's asking, for the environmental ministry and the Ministry of Agriculture to be lumped together. That is not an environmental NGO calling for that. And then the BDI, that's the German Industrial Association, also publishing a study to show how we can work towards climate neutrality. And I can tell you the pathways that they are suggesting is hardly any different to what we are calling for as part of the German Environment Agency. It's almost annoying. But the third aspect, we need to orient all of this towards justice and quality of life. It shouldn't be sold as an effort. It needs to be a benefit. The future needs to be cool and interesting and desirable. And if we can bring all that together, we can be successful. Thank you very much. Okay, 99 months, hopefully full of winds of change. I look forward to future discussions. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating. Stay healthy. See you again soon.